Have you ever picked up the phone and realized, within seconds, that the person on the other end wasn't really okay? That's what happened last week when Sarah called me. We hadn't talked in a while. Life had gotten busy, as it always does. But I could tell the moment I heard her voice that something was wrong. Terribly wrong. She didn't cry. She didn't even raise her voice. She just spoke in that quiet, tired tone that only people who are barely holding it together use. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said. "I love my baby, but I feel like I'm disappearing." I didn't know how to respond. I'm not a therapist. I'm not an expert. I'm just her friend, and right now, that doesn't feel like enough. But she gave me permission to share her story here, because maybe, if we tell it out loud, someone listening might help us find a way through. Before we talk about what broke her, I want to take you back to the beginning, to the version of Sarah I used to know, the one who smiled without trying, and still believed love was something safe. Before the silence, before the distance, before she started vanishing inside her own life, Sarah was light. Not loud, not attention-seeking, just quietly radiant in a way that made people lean in. She didn't try to impress anyone, she just showed up fully, genuinely. She was the kind of friend who remembered the smallest details. The kind of daughter who called home on Tuesdays just because. And when she loved someone, she loved with her whole heart. She was 23 when she met Jack, fresh out of college, working full-time at a boutique event planning firm downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She loved the chaos, the color, the way her hands could turn a plain room into something that made people feel. They met at a friend's engagement party. Sarah almost didn't go. She'd had a long week, a difficult client, and a headache that wouldn't quit. But her roommate pushed her out the door with a smile and a borrowed dress. Jack was magnetic in a quiet kind of way, charming, but not pushy, confident, but not performative. He asked thoughtful questions. He didn't just want to know what she did, he wanted to know why. Why Vans? Why beauty? Why care so much? And Sarah, she bloomed under that kind of attention. Not because she needed it, but because it felt rare, intentional. It felt like someone finally saw her. Their connection moved fast, but not reckless. Dinners turned into weekends. Weekends turned into holidays. He sent her playlists and flowers, not roses, which she always thought were cliché, but wildflowers, daisies, little things that meant he'd been listening. Jack said he wanted a real partnership, a home, a family, a life built on something honest. He talked about growing up with a single mom and how he'd learned what not to do, how he wanted to show up differently. Sarah believed him. Their relationship felt easy in the beginning. They had matching calendars and inside jokes. They cooked together or try. Anyway, Jack burned rice like it was an art form, and Sarah teased him about it endlessly. But what mattered more was how they showed up when things weren't easy. When Sarah lost her aunt, Jack was the one who sat with her in silence and held her hand at the funeral. When Jack had a rough month at work, Sarah left notes in his coat pocket and made him pancakes on a Tuesday. They were the kind of couple people rooted for. The kind that made others believe maybe love didn't have to be dramatic to be real. He proposed on a quiet night. They were on a short weekend trip, sitting under string lights with wine and music and laughter between them. He told her she made him feel grounded, seen, safe. And when he asked her to marry him, Sarah didn't hesitate. She was ready, not just for a wedding, but for a life with him. They moved into a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, painted the walls themselves, argued about which shade of blue was actually blue, started saving for a future that felt close enough to touch. A year later, they found out she was pregnant. It wasn't planned, but it wasn't unwelcome either. Jack smiled like a man who had just won something big. Sarah cried when she saw the little flickering heartbeat on the ultrasound screen. And for a while, everything felt steady, joyful, full. Jack painted the nursery himself. He played music to her belly. They read parenting books and joked about baby names in the middle of the night. Sarah swore she felt the baby kick when Jack told a truly terrible dad joke and they both laughed until they couldn't breathe. She kept working during her pregnancy, but slowed down. Jack encouraged her to rest more. He said, "You're growing a person. That's more than enough." And Sarah believed him again. Because love, to her, had always looked like shared effort, shared softness. They weren't perfect, but they were trying. And that counted for something. She was glowing in those final months, not just from the pregnancy, but from the belief that she was stepping into the life she had always wanted. She didn't know what was coming. She couldn't have, because sometimes it's not a storm that takes everything apart. It's the slow shift in the air, the way light starts to fade before you even notice the sun is setting. And for Sarah, that shift was already beginning. Their daughter was born on a rainy Thursday morning. She had Jack's eyes, that soft gray that always looked like the sky right before a storm, and Sarah's warm skin tone, like late summer sun on bare shoulders. The nurses said she was calm for a newborn, almost too quiet, as if she already understood the world she'd entered wasn't gentle. But to Sarah, she was perfect, completely, breathtakingly perfect. The delivery had been long, exhausting. Sarah didn't sleep for nearly 2 days. But when they placed that tiny bundle in her arms, something in her cracked open. Not broken, just exposed. She cried while holding her. Cried because she was overwhelmed, terrified, in awe. Because no one tells you how heavy love can feel when it comes all at once. For a little while, Jack was attentive. He held the baby skin to skin, took photos, sent updates to family. He told Sarah she was amazing, brought her favorite juice in the hospital, played soft music while she tried to nurse through tears and exhaustion. But as the weeks went on, something in him began to dim. It wasn't obvious at first. A missed feeding here, a work call that lasted too long, a sudden shift in tone when the baby wouldn't stop crying. Sarah noticed it, but she brushed it aside. She was tired. Hormones were everywhere. Maybe she was just being sensitive. Still, it stung. He stopped looking at her the same way, stopped asking how she was really doing, started making jokes that didn't quite feel like jokes. "You've turned into a mom machine," he said once, when she forgot to wash his favorite shirt. She laughed nervously, but it settled her chest like a stone. At night, when the baby cried, it was always Sarah who got up, even when she was still healing, when her body screamed for rest. And the baby, sweet, quiet, observant, never made a fuss, almost as if she sensed her mother couldn't take one more breakdown. She would just lie there in Sarah's arms, blinking slowly, breathing evenly. There were nights Sarah sat on the nursery floor, holding her daughter and staring at the wall, too tired to cry, too numb to move. Somewhere in that quiet, something in her began to fray. It wasn't just the exhaustion. It was the loneliness, the silence, The way Jack began to come home later and later, always with a reason. He said work was busy, that he needed to stay competitive. He was trying to provide, he said. And Sarah wanted to believe that. But when she asked if he could help with bath time, he sighed too loudly. When she asked if he could take a feeding shift, he muttered something about needing sleep for real work. And Sarah, still bleeding, still broken open, still trying, nodded and said, "Okay," because what else was there to say? She had stopped recognizing herself in the mirror. She didn't wear anything but pajamas. Her hair was always up, skin pale, eyes dull. She wasn't sad all the time, but she wasn't anything most of the time. That scared her. There were days she'd stare at the baby monitor for hours, even when the baby was asleep. Other days, she'd forget to eat. Once, she caught herself standing in the kitchen, holding a bottle of painkillers, not because she wanted to take them, but because she didn't know how else to make the noise stop. But then her daughter cried. That soft, aching cry that reminded Sarah she was needed. And she came back to herself. That's how it was, over and over again. Drifting, coming back, drifting again. Jack didn't seem to notice. He'd kiss her on the cheek on the way out the door, say things like, "You've got this, babe," without really looking at her, without asking if she actually did. The space between them grew like a quiet fog. No fights, no yelling, just less. Less laughter, less tenderness, less of everything that used to make their love feel alive. And Sarah, in the middle of 2 a.m. feedings and 10-minute showers and a body that no longer felt like her own, began to wonder if this was what motherhood was supposed to be. Lonely, heavy, silent. She didn't know who to tell, didn't want to seem ungrateful, didn't want anyone to think she wasn't a good mom. So she kept quiet. And in that silence, something inside her began to break. And one night, when Jack left his phone on the kitchen counter and went to shower, the screen lit up, and what Sarah saw next unraveled everything. He didn't apologize. Not really. He just explained, rationalized, justified. And Sarah, still holding their daughter, just listened. The baby stirred slightly, then rested her head against Sarah's collarbone again. Still calm, still quiet, like she knew her mother was using every last ounce of strength just to stay upright. "I didn't want to hurt you," Jack said at last. "You did," she replied, "and you still are." Jack didn't sleep there that night. He packed a bag, said he needed space, said this wasn't permanent, said a lot of things that didn't matter anymore. Sarah didn't cry until the door closed behind him. And even then, she cried quietly in the nursery, alone, with the baby asleep in her crib and the walls closing in around her. She thought she had felt tired before, but this was something else. This was emptiness. She sat on the floor, knees to her chest, and stared at the mobile spinning above the crib, each soft animal twirling slowly, peacefully, mocking her with their calm. Her mind raced. How long had it been going on? Was it emotional? Physical? Did it even matter? Somewhere between midnight and morning, she found herself searching her own memory, trying to pinpoint the moment things had started to shift, trying to remember if there had been a warning sign, a hint, anything. But grief doesn't hand you a timeline. It just arrives loud, sudden, brutal. Sarah didn't sleep. She sat by the crib all night, the baby occasionally whimpering in her dreams. And each time, Sarah would reach out, stroke her back, and whisper, "It's okay, Mommy's here." Even when she wasn't sure she believed it. She didn't tell anyone. Not yet. She didn't know how. Didn't want the pity. Didn't want the explanations. Didn't want to hear phrases like, "He didn't deserve you," or "You'll get through this," or "You're so strong." She didn't feel strong. She felt broken in places that didn't even have names. And in the quiet that followed Jack's absence, the silence became heavier than his betrayal. But silence doesn't stay still. It seeps into the cracks. And slowly, it begins to undo you. In the days that followed, Sarah didn't fall apart dramatically. There were no screaming fits, no angry texts, no grand gestures of grief, just stillness. A kind of slow motion collapse that no one could see unless they were really paying attention. She still got up with the baby, still made bottles, still changed diapers at 2 a.m. with one eye closed and the other barely open. From the outside, it might have looked like she was holding it together. But inside, Sarah was dissolving. Not in pieces, but in layers. The color drained first, then the sound, then the meaning. She forgot what day it was more than once. Skipped meals without realizing. Found herself staring at the same spot on the wall for 20 minutes and had no idea why. The baby, sweet and observant, remained unusually calm. Rarely cried, rarely fussed. Almost like she knew her mother couldn't take any more noise. Sometimes, when Sarah sat in the nursery chair, long after her daughter had fallen asleep, the baby would stir and reach for her, a soft hand to Sarah's chest, a look that felt older than her months. Those small moments kept her tethered, but barely. Jack didn't reach out much. A few texts here and there. "Hope you're okay. Let me know if you need anything." It was strange how someone could cause an earthquake in your life, and then offer you a band-aid with the detachment of a stranger. Sarah didn't reply. She didn't trust what might come out if she started talking. And, truthfully, she didn't have the energy to explain her silence. One afternoon, she stood in the shower and let the water hit her skin until it turned cold. She couldn't remember if she had shampooed her hair, or if she had even undressed before stepping in. It all blurred. Some nights, she stayed awake until sunrise. Not because she couldn't sleep, but because she didn't want to dream. Other nights, she passed out fully clothed, sitting upright on the couch with the baby monitor balanced on her knee. She began writing down things she wanted to remember. Feed the baby. Pay the electric bill. Eat something. Text mom back. Breathe. It felt ridiculous to write breathe, but some days, it wasn't obvious how to do that either. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was the numbness. Sarah had expected to be heartbroken. What she hadn't expected was to feel gone. Like someone had opened a door in her chest and everything inside had slipped out quietly in the night. She avoided mirrors, stopped taking pictures, stopped listening to music because every song sounded like it used to mean something. The baby smiled more these days. She had started reaching for things, cooing, exploring the soft blanket animals in her crib. And when she looked up at Sarah with those storm-colored eyes, it felt like a question. "Where are you?" Sarah didn't have an answer, but she always reached back, always picked her up, always said, "It's okay, baby, Mommy's here." Even when she didn't believe it. Even when a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "Are you?" She didn't tell her friends, didn't post anything online, didn't mention Jack or the affair or how often she thought about disappearing. because saying it out loud would make it real. And she wasn't ready for real yet. One night, she sat at the kitchen table long after the baby had gone to sleep. The dishes were piled in the sink. The air was heavy. She scrolled through her phone aimlessly, old texts, old photos, old versions of herself. And then she landed on a name she hadn't seen in a while. A friend from college. Someone who had once said, "Call me, even if it's been years. Especially if it's been years." Sarah stared at the contact. Her thumb hovered. She didn't need advice. She didn't even know what she needed. But she didn't want to be alone anymore. She typed just 4 words. "Hey, are you around?" The reply came minutes later. "Yes. Do you want to talk?" Sarah didn't know how to explain what was happening. Didn't know where to begin. But for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she had to carry it alone. She exhaled. Not a sigh of relief, but the beginning of one. Sometimes, healing doesn't begin with answers. It begins with not being the only one asking the questions. They didn't talk for long that first night. Sarah wasn't ready to tell everything. She barely knew how to put any of it into words. But the voice on the other end of the line, familiar, calm, patient, didn't push. She just listened. And maybe that was enough. They talked about the baby at first. About sleep schedules and bottles, and how no one really prepares you for how lonely early motherhood can be. Sarah kept her voice low, not because the baby was sleeping, but because she was afraid that saying too much might make it all too real. Still, something inside her loosened. That night, after she hung up, she cried for the first time in days. Not the tight, silent tears gotten used to, but the kind of crying that left her breathing deeper. The kind that made her feel human again. In the days that followed, Sarah started doing small things differently. She opened the windows. She played soft music in the morning's lullabies, old favorite songs, even if they still made her ache. She stepped outside with the baby wrapped to her chest, even if just to feel the sun on her skin for a few minutes. She replied to a text, then another. She called her mom. She didn't talk about Jack or the affair, but she let her voice shake when she said, "I'm tired." Her mom didn't ask questions, just said, "I love you, I'm here." That helped more than Sarah expected. She wasn't trying to get better. She just didn't want to disappear. One evening, her friend, the one she called first, offered to come over. "I can bring snacks. Or silent, whichever you need." Sarah hesitated, then said yes. They sat on the couch and watched a movie they'd already seen 10 times. The baby lay quietly in her bassinet nearby, blinking up at the ceiling, kicking gently in her soft cotton onesie. There was something sacred about the normalcy, about not having to explain herself, about laughing at a stupid scene without worrying if she was allowed to be okay for a moment. Her friend didn't ask about Jack, didn't ask what Sarah planned to do next. She just refilled the tea mug and stayed. That night, Sarah slept for 4 straight hours. It felt like a miracle. The next week, she searched online for local therapists. Her hands shook when she clicked the first link. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. She just knew she couldn't keep spiraling alone. Her first session was awkward. She sat in a small beige room with tissues on the table and avoided eye contact for most of the hour. But the therapist didn't rush her, didn't label her, didn't say, "You have to decide now." Instead, she asked, "When was the last time someone asked you how you were?" and really waited for the answer. Sarah couldn't remember. So she came back the next week, and the week after that. She started journaling again. Not the polished kind, just scribbles, fragments, things like, "I don't trust myself right now." She smiled at me today, and it hurt in a good way. "I think I hate him, but I miss who I thought he was." No one else read it, but the act of writing, of letting the thoughts out instead of holding them in her chest, made her feel like less of a ghost. There were setbacks. Some days, she still forgot to eat. Some nights, she lay awake, staring at the baby monitor, bracing for a cry that never came. But now, when the sadness came, she didn't hide from it. She named it. She let it pass through. She reminded herself that grief wasn't weakness, it was evidence of love. One afternoon, while feeding her daughter, Sarah caught her reflection in the window. She didn't look better. Her hair was messy. There were circles under her eyes. She was still in the same faded hoodie. But something had changed. She was here, present, inside her body again, and her daughter, sweet and steady, reached for her with one tiny hand, her fingers wrapping around Sarah's thumb. Sarah smiled, not out of joy, but out of recognition. She was still her, just different, more tender, more tired, more real. She didn't know what came next. She hadn't made any big decisions, but she was beginning to believe that maybe she didn't have to know yet. And in that space between collapse and clarity, a new version of her was quietly taking shape. There was no big turning point, no epiphany, no moment where Sarah stood up, shouted something brave, and declared she was done with all of it. Instead, there were small things, like making her bed in the morning, like brushing her hair even if no one was coming over, like saying, "I'm not okay today," without apologizing for it. She wasn't better. She was just beginning to breathe again. Some days, she still cried in the shower. Some days, she still missed the version of Jack she thought she married. But she had stopped hoping he would become that person again. And that was its own kind of freedom. She started seeing glimpses of herself in new places, not in the mirror, but in the way she sang softly while holding her daughter, in the way she spoke up at the pediatrician's office, in the way she laughed at a joke and didn't feel guilty afterward. Her daughter was getting bigger now, more expressive. She smiled often, babbled loudly, reached out for Sarah with trust and wonder. That connection grounded her. There was something unshakable in the way her baby looked at her, like she was still whole, even when Sarah couldn't feel it. And slowly, Sarah began to believe it too. She hadn't decided what to do about her marriage. She hadn't mapped out a plan, but she no longer felt like she was drowning in it. Now, it was something she could observe like weather. Painful, inevitable, but passing. She no longer blamed herself for his choices, no longer bent herself in circles trying to be enough. She didn't owe anyone a perfectly healed version of herself. She only owed herself the truth. And the truth was, she was still here, still showing up, still trying, still holding her daughter close every night and whispering, "We're okay. I don't know how, but we are." It wasn't closure in the traditional sense. There was no final conversation, no clean ending. Just a quiet acceptance that not all stories resolve the way we imagined. But that doesn't mean they're not worth telling. And maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not getting over it, but learning to live with what you've carried, and still choosing to move forward anyway. I wish I could tell you how this ends. I wish I could say Sarah is happy now, that she made a decision, that she's fully healed. But the truth is, she's still figuring it out. She's still waking up each day and doing her best. Still holding on to the baby in one arm and herself in the other. She called me because she didn't know what to do. And after listening, really listening, I realized I didn't know either. I'm not a therapist. I haven't lived through what she's living. All I know is that I love my friend. And I don't want her to feel alone in this anymore. That's why I shared her story here with her permission. Because maybe someone out there, maybe you has been where she is. Maybe you understand what it's like to love deeply and lose yourself slowly. Maybe your words, your perspective, your truth could be the thing she needs to hear right now. So, if you're watching this and you have anything to say to Sarah, please leave it in the comments. She'll be reading, and so will I, because sometimes the most powerful thing we can give each other is not an answer, but a reminder that we don't have to go through the hard parts alone. If this story touched something in you, if you saw even a small piece of your own journey in hers, we'd love for you to stay, like this video, subscribe for more real, honest stories like this one. And when you're ready, click here to listen to the next story, because healing doesn't happen in one moment. It happens one story at a time. And if you are going through something hard to name, have a story you've been carrying quietly, or just wish someone would truly listen without judgment, we're here. This channel is a space where you can share your story, anonymously or not. It's entirely up to you. We'll receive it with care, and if you're open to it, we'll tell it just like we told Sarah's. Because maybe you're not ready to speak it out loud yet, but you still deserve to be understood.